So I'm delighted to be joined today by four excellent panelists who are going to share with us their insights at this sort of post-election time with Brexit deadlines looming and obviously the global pandemic. But keen to hear thoughts about how crucial this period is for this special relationship between the UK and the US, which is obviously so much talked about. To set the scene, I thought it might be useful for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and to give a little bit of an overview of their role and also their connection to the debate on either side of the Atlantic. Can I start, perhaps starting over the other side of the Atlantic? John, perhaps we come to you, and then Joe, Conor and Jake. That'd be great.
Well, Hannah, thanks, and good afternoon to all of you, but it's pretty early in the morning here, I can tell you, in the U.S. My name's John Boehner. I'm the former Speaker of the United States House of Representatives and spent 25 years in the U.S. Congress. I've been associated with Squire Patton Boggs as a Senior Strategic Advisor for the last 4 years. Listen, the election was interesting to say the least. Red America got redder and blue America got bluer. And the biggest surprise was not Joe Biden winning the election. The biggest surprise was that Joe Biden won and Republicans gained substantial seats in the U.S. House and appear to be on the threshold of holding the majority in the U.S. Senate. And so what that says is we're going to have divided government for at least the next 2 years, probably the next 4 years. And as a result, I actually think there's an opportunity for the new administration to work with Republicans in Congress to find some common ground on some issues. And whether it's infrastructure, could be on spending, but clearly when it comes to a UK-US trade deal, I think there's an opportunity for cooperation to bring that about. And so we can get into a lot more details if you'd like on the election or what's likely to happen. But with the COVID resurgence in the U.S. and President-elect Biden's position on this, I suspect we're going to see the economy take another slowdown, if you will, as more and more people want to protect themselves and stay inside. And so I think we're looking at another stimulus bill. Whether they can get something done between now and the end of the year, I've got my doubts. But clearly, I think there's going to be an effort at a fairly significant stimulus program sometime over the next 3 or 4 months. Just get ready. With that, I'll yield to you, Joe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. John, thank you very much. It is bright and early over here on the East Coast and in the States, and good to talk to our friends in the UK. I'm former Congressman Joe Crowley. I represented parts of Queens and the Bronx from New York City in the House of Representatives for 20 years. I was a member of the Ways and Means Committee, as well as I was in the elected leadership. I was the chair of the Democratic Caucus in my last term in Congress. Prior to my service in the House of Representatives, I served for 12 years in the New York State Legislature and the State Assembly. So I was in government for most of my adult life, and have a great experience on both state politics as well, New York, as well as national politics as well. I for one welcome the change in government here and the prospects here in the States. Very elated about the success of Joe Biden, but I think the speaker's correct in the observation that red states, or red America got redder and blue America got bluer. But I have hope in Joe Biden in his speech on Saturday, talking about wanting to unite the country and to heal the wounds. There's no question there's a lot of healing that has to take place. It's not going to happen overnight. And I suspect that that is going to be a main focus of his presidency. What is really job one for the president, as John indicated, I think, is to crush the virus. Now, how that happens, no one really knows at this point. We've had good news this week with the prospects of a vaccine being talked about here, but the distribution of that, the effectiveness of that, efficacy of that, and the distribution of it is still questioned as to whether people will take it, quite frankly. But we are making progress. I do think that is job one for this administration, and but I know there are other issues, including trade, that you'd all love to talk about this morning, and I'm prepared to have that conversation. So, Hannah, I'll turn it back to you, or to over to Conor or Jerry.
Thanks, Conor. Can we come to you for a quick introduction, and then Jay? Thanks. Are you still on mute? Conor, actually, you're still muted. I don't know if you can. Thanks. Okay, it's gone now.
Can you hear me now? Excellent. My name is Conor Burns. I'm the Member of Parliament for Bournemouth West in England. I've been the Member of Parliament for Bournemouth West since 2010. I've held a number of roles on the outskirts of government and in government, including Parliamentary Private Secretary in the Northern Ireland Office, to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, to the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and to Boris Johnson when he was Foreign Secretary. I resigned from the government on the same day that Boris did over Theresa May's Brexit deal, and then spent the subsequent year working with him on a daily basis in the run-up to the inevitable leadership election that resulted in him becoming Prime Minister. When he became Prime Minister, he asked me to serve in the Department for International Trade as Minister of State for Trade Policy. And in terms of what's pertinent to our trade conversation today, my roles in there, I was responsible for the relationship with the devolved governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. I had the lead role with the United Kingdom's representation at the World Trade Organization. I was in charge of setting up the Trade Remedies Authority. I obviously had some role within the priority trade, free trade agreement negotiations, which are United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and more recently we confirmed our desire to accede to the CPTPP. But I had overall responsibility then for the rest of the world, so scoping out the opportunities when we either delivered one of our tier one trade priorities, or for whatever reason one of those fell away, as to where the next phase of free trade agreement ambitions lay. So obviously we're following incredibly closely what the change of administration in the United States means for the prospects of getting that free trade agreement with the United States. I'm taking a particular interest in President Biden's interests in Northern Ireland, how we resolve the remaining Northern Ireland within the UK single market, but not erecting any barriers to trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And President Biden obviously has quite a sentimental, very pro-nationalist slant to the question of Northern Ireland. I'm from Northern Ireland. I'm an unusual creature from Northern Ireland. I'm both a Catholic and a Unionist. But I think we in the United Kingdom are going to have to be very diplomatic in how we engage with this new administration in helping to inform them that what we're trying to do in leaving the European Union, on delivering on the Brexit referendum, will in no way, we will not allow in any way to hamper freedom of movement within the island of Ireland and free trade within the island of Ireland, whilst absolutely maintaining the single market of every part of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Good afternoon, I'm Jake Berry. I am the former Minister of State, and I served in the Cabinet, in Boris Johnson's first Cabinet, for the Northern Powerhouse. And my sort of role in that was to look at the opportunity across the north of England, particularly in terms of a pan-northern trade body and international trade, which is a job I'm doing and continue to do with a group of backbench colleagues as something called this Northern Research Group. And we are currently working with the Treasury and Downing Street on a Northern Recovery Plan for the north of England. And what I think is quite interesting about the fantastic sort of share of democracy that we've seen in the United States of America over the last couple of weeks is that their government and President-elect Biden was elected on a manifesto of hope. And I think that's something particularly we need to move back to here in the United Kingdom, because we, as a Conservative government, won the general election based on a manifesto of hope, hope for a better Brexit deal, hope for levelling up communities across the north of England. I suppose that would be the red states in the United States. And I think there is a real opportunity now for our government to move beyond a dominant discussion on COVID, which has taken the last year away from us, to move back to a domestic agenda which is led by hope, which is really the great strength of our Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And I think he will have a brilliant ally and fellow traveller in President-elect Biden on that journey. It's crucially important, of course, for us as a United Kingdom to ensure that we build a strong relationship from the start and get that crucial American free trade deal, which I personally believe will have a huge impact across the economies, the communities, and the high-tech and high-value manufacturers in the north of England. There is great affinity that we can work on and build on, and that's certainly what we hope to do.
Thanks all. That was a really helpful introduction and hopefully sets the scene quite nicely for our discussion. So, I mean, as the dust starts to settle on the election, and I say starts to settle because I know that there's plenty of scope for the dust to get stirred up. I think in the context of this trade discussion, I think it'd be great to get an initial overview of what the sort of the specific policy or economic changes that the new administration might want to bring, what impact they're going to have on those discussions and helping us get to that deal. So, Joe, perhaps want to come to you first on.
Well, Hannah, I think that the President-elect Biden and a future administration will be focusing, I think, initially on the economy here in the States and its recovery. That doesn't mean they can't walk and chew gum at the same time. That they will be looking, I think, for opportunities. Obviously, trade has been a more difficult point in the Democratic caucus, although I will say that Donald Trump kind of turned that upside down on its head. You know, Republicans typically were viewed as being the pro-trade agreement party, where there was more resistance in the Democratic caucus. And I'm not saying that resistance doesn't still exist, it does. But when we look back and see how President Trump had panned the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, as well as having panned the what was known at that time as NAFTA, calling it the worst trade agreement ever negotiated or agreed to, when most would suggest that the new U.S.-Canadian Mexico agreement was marginally better than NAFTA. But it did garner overwhelming support from the Democratic caucus in its passage in the House. So it is kind of interesting how trade itself has evolved. And I think many of why that passed was because the issues that Democrats had cared about for many years, the environment, as well as labor rights, etc., were made advancements in the USMCA that had not been seen, quite frankly, in most other trade agreements. And that's coming from someone like myself, who had been more often than not supportive of trade agreements in the past. So I do think the relationship between the UK and the United States is a strong one. It will continue to be. And that special relationship will continue, as will the EU-US relationship continue, which I think there'll be a re-engagement in. I think you've seen already through the euphoria that we've experienced overseas in terms of the election of Biden, whether it's in Germany, in France, Great Britain, Ireland, everywhere within Europe. There seems to be a new turn here for the better. And I think that's good, quite frankly, for the world, certainly for the Europe and the U.S. relations, but for the world. But there's a ways to go here. We have economic issues here, as the speakers indicated, largely driven by COVID. So and that's why I do think that when it comes to any change in the code, it's going to be difficult because the tax code, because of the Republicans controlling the Senate at this point, it seems, although we have special elections in Georgia we can talk about in terms of how that's also, I think, playing a role in terms of Republicans not necessarily yet recognizing that Biden is president-elect. But there certainly are issues that need to be dealt with here, and that's why I think he's going to move very carefully as it pertains to taxes because of the impact that can have on our economy, and et cetera. So I think we're uncharted waters right now, and I think there's more to be played out as his cabinet comes together.
Thank you.
Joe, one of the big issues that we're going to pull up here in the United Kingdom, one of the challenges around the trade debate so far, is equivalency of standards, particularly in food standards. It's a really big issue. You may have seen the chlorinated chicken debate in the UK. As President-elect Biden develops the strength of his relationship both with the United Kingdom and the European Union, do you think there will be encouragement within the democratic movement about looking towards equivalency in sort of employment protection standards, which in many cases are higher in both Europe and the United Kingdom? Is that a sort of a door into the heart of the Democratic Party to try and get these trade agreements going?
Yeah, I always believed that the TPP, although initially when it was first announced, there were fewer countries involved. It grew over time, and that's what became ungainly, and I thought harder and harder for Democrats to support. Putting Vietnam on the same level as, say, New Zealand was hard for Democrats to kind of swallow in terms of labor rights in particular and environmental standards. There's no question, Jake, in terms of the equivalency or even higher standards in many respects in some countries within the EU and certainly the UK as it pertains to labor rights, for instance. So I always believed that we would have been much better served had the Obama administration really moved first on the EU and created an atmosphere by which Democrats could see how they could support a multilateral trade agreement before going to the Pacific. Understanding that China is a real issue for us and their dominance in the Pacific. I just thought right now we have neither an agreement in the Pacific nor with the EU at this point. So, a lot of time was lost when I think we could have at least established that head ground with our oldest allies in Europe before moving on to more uncharted territory in the Pacific. I do think there are, agricultural issues, there are financial services issues, there are on services, there are a lot of issues that I think need to be worked out. We were fortunate, I think, in this administration to have someone like Lighthizer, who was respected by Democrats, and this is probably the most respected administration ambassador within the government in terms of Democrats, and I think that in large part led to the USMCA actually being passed because Democrats had faith in Lighthizer's words when he was negotiating. It remains to be seen who Biden chooses as Commerce Secretary and as Trade Ambassador, and that will speak large volume, I think, in terms of the ability to get things done.
Thanks both. Thank you. Just coming to the UK then, Conor, picking up with you, sort of in terms of the current state of play, where we are now. What are those priorities? We heard yesterday Boris Johnson on his call with President-elect Biden talking about sort of the shared priorities that were at the forefront of their minds. Where are we at the moment, and sort of what does the imminent discussion look like?
Okay, so no, that's a very, very good question. I think the first thing to say is that the United States is the United Kingdom's largest single trading partner, other than the EU, which is of course a group of many other countries. It's the largest single nation that we trade with, and we trade incredibly successfully without a free trade agreement in place at present. So, the view of the government is we would love to have a free trade agreement, but it is not the be-all and end-all. The trading relationship will not be interrupted by the absence of a new FTA. The second thing to say is we've moved on so far from that period during the 2016 referendum where President Obama came over to tell us that if we left the EU, we'd be at the back of the queue. There's a huge amount of work that's been done, and the point that's just been made about Secretary Lighthizer is a vitally important one. President-elect Biden is coming in and will face a situation where a substantial amount of work has already been done. a substantial amount of common ground has been found that would be in the interest of both our nations in a new FTA. So for him to decide to tear that up, I think would be something that he probably won't want to do. I accept it won't necessarily be a top priority. The other question remains, can we make further progress before President-elect Biden becomes president in January? The Trump administration still has a couple of months to run. The negotiations are at an advanced stage. And I think the final point I would make on this, and it was a point that I made deliberately when I came to the United States in February, and I was the first UK government minister to visit the United States after the UK legally left the EU. And my officials predictably put two suggested destinations for my visit. One was Washington, and the other was California. Politics and tech. And I said, no, I want to go to Texas. Now, if Texas were a country in her own right, she'd have the 7th largest economy in the world. And the point that I kept making to our officials in the Department for International Trade is that there was so much more that we could do through our consulate network across the states of the United States to remove trade barriers and to get more trade going between the United States and the UK at a state level. And much of the stuff that we could achieve that would remove market access barriers can be done at that state level, even in the absence of a global FTA at a federal level. Things like professional mutual recognition of legal qualifications, of accountancy qualifications. Those sort of things can make it significantly easier for companies to do business in each other's countries. But I remain optimistic that when President-elect Biden sees the extent of the progress that's already been made and sees that the deal that we're proposing, particularly in things like data, which is a huge opportunity once we're unshackled from the EU's incredibly restrictive regulations on that, he will see that deal is nearly done and is in the interests of both our countries. And it could actually be quite a quick win for his administration.
John, I suppose picking up on Conor's point there about the substantial work and common ground that we've already gained or has been achieved, does that echo your thoughts from a US perspective in terms of where we've got to on the discussions so far? Is there more to build on?
I think the work that's been done thus far is good work, and at the level that it's been operating on these discussions, a lot of those same people are going to be involved in the next administration because they're civil servants. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. The Biden administration, when it comes in, they're going to have to get a trade rep. They're going to have to get their act together. And so it's going to take the better part of 2021 for them to get their feet on the ground and to continue this in a serious way. And when it comes to trade issues, we all know it's always the last half dozen issues that take a lot longer than all the rest of it. And secondly, while there is this U.S.-UK special relationship, I think whether it was the Trump administration or, frankly, was the Trump administration, let's not get sidetracked with this sideshow that's going on right now. But the Biden administration, they've got to keep an eye toward what does an agreement look like with the EU eventually, and that's going to kind of overshadow the U.S.-UK discussion. Because they can't come to an agreement with the UK that's going to potentially put them in a serious box in terms of an eventual EU-US trade relationship. And so, but as pointed out, though, there's a long relationship between the US and the UK in terms of trade, long relationship between the U.S. and the EU in terms of trade, but trying to get this into a formalized agreement is going to be a hell of a lot harder than people think. So hold on, we'll work our way through these, but it's going to take a while.
And Hannah, could I just interject on that point? I think John is correct. I do think when we look at, when the U.S. looks, we still look at Europe as a whole, so to speak, and I think that the EU is a much bigger piece and more complicated to some degree as well. but maybe just I won't say more important, but as important as the UK would be as well. But the point that Conor had made earlier about the sentimentality of Biden towards Ireland, I think it's important to note. I think he is sentimental towards his ancestry, etc. But there's nothing sentimental about his governing, I don't think. And when it comes to the issue of Northern Ireland, nothing sentimental about the cessation of violence, nothing sentimental about an international treaty, the Good Friday Agreement, and its recognition as international law. So I think that's where Biden will be coming from, that, and not wanting to do something that would disrupt or to turn back the clock, so to speak. So I do think there is a sentimentality there that I myself share, but at the same time practical in terms of recognizing the special relationship between the United States and the UK, which is real. And I, as an Irish American, would say that it's more than real. And it's important, and as is our relationship with Germany, as is our relationship with France and our other traditional allies in Europe. So I think that's an important point to make. But John is right, as I said before, in terms of the big picture, and we have to get our own house in order here in the States. We're facing a lot of issues that Biden, I think, is going to prioritize here in the States, get our own house in order.
And I suppose, I mean, we saw yesterday on the news here, we saw the sort of the video footage of Boris Johnson's phone call with President-elect Biden and mention of the special relationship, and you know, which has obviously been talked about for a long time. I suppose, Conor, Jake, you know, how much reliance are we placing on that? How important is it going to be for us to sort of having heard what Joe and John have said about perhaps the US perspective on it? How much reliance are we placing on that?
I think my view has always been a transactional relationship. I talked about President Biden perhaps being overly sentimental about Ireland. I think we are, from the United Kingdom perspective, sometimes overly sentimental about what the special relationship means. Now, look, we have a huge shared history, but the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom has transcended the relationships between presidents and prime ministers. It's fundamentally a relationship between two peoples of basic shared values. And if you look at the complexity of the intertwined nature of the relationship in intelligence sharing, in security, militarily, economic, financial, of course it's going to maintain, and it would maintain, frankly, even if Boris and Joe Biden didn't particularly get on. I think actually they will get on because, as Jake knows as well as I do, but two close allies of the Prime Minister, the characterization of Boris Johnson as somehow sort of a British Trump is desperately unfair. Boris is a very liberal conservative. He's liberal on social issues. He's an internationalist. He cares passionately about animal welfare, about global warming, a lot of things that will find common ground with the Democrat Party. So I'm optimistic the relationship will be good. And I think ultimately the United States government, of whatever colour, knows the United Kingdom is above all else its most reliable international ally.
I think from my point of view, I sort of echo lots of things that's Conor said, but also just tipping back slightly to the trade talks. It's quite interesting to hear about how people believe that the United States may pivot towards a European trade agreement and be concerned about concluding one with the United Kingdom before that is secured. Negotiating treaties with the European Union, particularly in the area of trade, is labyrinthian in its complexity. And of course, you're negotiating not really with the European Union, you're negotiating with 20 plus individual countries who all have their very strong lobby groups, whether it's olive oil from southern Spain or prawns from southern Italy. And I just sort of, I do think there is real value in building on the special relationship and making the trade agreements about, well, let's agree what we can agree on. And I think the United States can get to that position with the United Kingdom in fairly short order, given the work that's taken place, if they desire it. I think there will be a huge challenge doing that with the European Union. We saw recently a trade treaty blocked by the Parliament of Wallonia. I have my atlas up like everyone else, where on earth is Wallonia? But it is so hard, and it's one of the reasons, of course, that Britain's left the European Union. It is so hard where you have conflicting views and conflicting priorities to conclude things in the area and the region of free trade with the European Union, which by its very nature, although it is a free trade zone, is extremely protectionist and wants to keep non-European products more expensive than ones manufactured in the European Union. So I think there is a real opportunity for us to do something relatively quickly. I think we're talking in years rather than months, in the areas we agree, and park all the areas where we don't agree for a future UK-US trade deal 2.0, I think.
Thank you. And John, coming to you, we've touched on some of the sort of what we're thinking of the sort of sticking points. Connor's run through some of them. Are there any that you think, from a US perspective, or Joe, that we've missed? Anything that should be sort of higher up on our negotiation agenda that we haven't touched on yet that could cause a problem?
Well, when you get into the trade specifics, you're getting really way past an elected official's capacity to deal with this. But if you look at the traditional problems in trade, agriculture, and the whole subsidy issue, and what's a subsidy and what isn't. I think in the financial services area, that ought to be relatively, I think, easy to resolve. But when you get into the issue of food standards and what I would describe as the non-tariff barriers that the countries find easy ways to erect to protect their domestic suppliers, that's where the really difficult moments will be. But beyond that, I'll let the experts figure out the real hot spots.
I think John hit the nail on the head. It's on the non-tariff barriers. That's always been the problem with any of the agreements we've entered into. We've seen that in South Korea as well, for instance, and others who continue to protect their own primary industries. And so whether it's on autos or we've seen it elsewhere, John's absolutely right. So, but I think the normal, whether it's on specific sectors, but also within the agreement itself, whether, again, on the environment, on labor, as much as we see more commonality with the UK and EU on those issues, it's not without issues themselves and those details. And I think it goes back to what Conor had mentioned in terms of the work that's been done by Lighthouse. I think that will be respected and will be a base for moving forward. But it's not the end. It's maybe just the beginning at that point, or at least the middle.
And I think just coming on, we've touched on some of the areas around timescales as well, and there's obviously a long game ahead. I think John said obviously the things we're working on, and we've heard about Jake commenting years rather than months. I mean, Jake and Conor, we've got sort of a lot of plates spinning obviously in the UK at the moment with the sort of deadlines looming. Anything about the sort of the change in administration that I think causes concern from a timescale perspective? And I guess, Joe, interested to hear what happens over the next couple of months. How quickly are things swinging into action for sort of engaging in these discussions?
So I very deliberately said earlier that whilst I had some role within the US-UK negotiations, I was in charge of the rest of the world. And I used a very deliberate phrase that my former Secretary of State didn't always like me using. And I said I was involved in drawing up the priority countries or groups of countries, Mercosur, for example, that we would engage with if we either delivered one of our free trade agreement ambitions or one of them dropped away. And I was always more pessimistic about the chances of getting the US one over the line in the first Trump term. And by the way, that's our fault, because Trump was tripping over himself in the rush at the beginning of his administration to start the talks. And Mrs. May's government prevaricated and delayed. And frankly, had we started those talks perhaps a couple of years earlier, we might be in a position where they were concluding before the end of the Trump first term, or the Trump only term as it would now appear. And that's entirely our fault. So I'm not optimistic that this will now be quickly resolved for the reasons that others have alluded to. This will not necessarily be an urgent priority for President Biden in his first year. All his appointments have got to be made and ratified although the point that John made is a very valid one. Our negotiating team is broadly remaining the same because they are officials. They are not elected politicians, and that will be broadly the same. Those who are working through the technical side to these talks that I sometimes got involved in at the margins as a minister, tried to explore, sometimes using bilateral ministerial engagement at the behest of officials to say, could you tease the Vietnamese on how they're now feeling towards the import of UK lamb or chicken for human consumption. I remember this, them saying, this is how technical it gets. I said, what do you mean chicken for human consumption? So, well, Minister, they will take our chicken for feeding to their livestock, but they won't take our chicken to feed to Vietnamese human beings. So there's all these sort of subsections that ministers don't get involved with, but officials will be carrying on that work in the background. I suspect throughout the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden one.
I would only add to that as well. I think Conor's correct. I agree with him on those points. But I also would remind our listeners and viewers that there's more to the U.S. government, obviously, than simply the president, and as much as there's more to the UK government than simply the Parliament, or at least the lower chamber. And that was reflected this week in terms of the House of Lords' actions as it pertains to Brexit. So also, keeping in mind that Speaker Pelosi has been outspoken on the issue of this agreement, both in England, or UK, in Ireland, and here in the States, and Richie Neal, the chairman of the committee that deals with trade issues here in the U.S. Congress, that Ways and Means Committee. Now, there may be more sentimentality there, but certainly not in Nancy Pelosi, who is not even of Irish descent per se. But I think, and not to diminish some sentimentality, but that it goes back to that point I made earlier about the substance of an agreement itself as well. Putting aside the Northern Irish issue as well, it is more complex than even that. And as we alluded to before, on ag, on services, where I do see us again, light years ahead of, say, Vietnam, for instance, but still not without its difficulties.
Can I just say on this question of Northern Ireland, because I think this is going to be absolutely vital for the government led by Boris Johnson to engage with the Biden administration. Look, I'm from Northern Ireland. I was born in Belfast. I have family all over the island of Ireland. The United Kingdom government has an unshakable commitment to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the St Andrews Agreement. But what may not have been noticed, perhaps in the States in the last few days, is there was a joint statement by the DUP First Minister and the Sinn Féin Deputy First Minister to the European Union about how it would be utterly unacceptable to them, both sides, both traditions, nationalist and unionist, in Northern Ireland, for Northern Ireland to be separated from the UK customs territory. And when we get into the detail of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, and I sometimes, when I listen to some comments, I'm not talking, by the way, about the president here, but some comments that come out from some of the Irish American community, I'm not totally convinced how familiar they are with the detail of what's in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. There isn't reference to borders except vis-a-vis the physical security infrastructure, where there's a commitment to remove that. That's ongoing. The United Kingdom government has been absolutely clear, the Prime Minister could not be clearer on this, that the UK government has no intention whatsoever of erecting any form of physical border or border checks between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And I think it's going to be really, really important for us to explain and persuade our American friends of our good intentions and our commitment here, because it would be a real shame if misunderstanding or even borderline misinformation was to pollute our negotiations and impede us getting to a mutually beneficial free trade agreement in due course.
And I think also, Conor, another thing just to pick up there is we are obviously still hopeful and negotiating hard to get an agreement with the European Union, and if, as I hope and believe, a satisfactory agreement is reached between the United Kingdom and the European Union, many of the issues around Ireland and Northern Ireland will melt away. The UK Internal Markets Act is an insurance policy. You know, the United States would not see its own internal market undermined by a foreign country or foreign body. But I sincerely hope, and I voted for this insurance policy, I sincerely hope that it is a policy in which we never make a claim, and that we have a successful negotiation with the European Union. That is where I believe we will still get by the end of the year. And of course, once this impediment to good and harmonious relationships with the President-elect Biden administration is removed, I think that we can all get on with the real thing that we want to focus on, which is ensuring that through free trade, of which, let's not forget, America is the global leader in terms of promotion of free trade, through free trade, enriching the peoples of our two great nations.
Just perhaps moving on, I think quite a lot of our audience today are sort of UK corporates and advisors looking at, I guess, looking forward in terms of what the sort of the US-UK trade position can do to support them going forward. And we actually had a specific question in, might be one sort of particularly for Conor and Jake, in terms of, so putting aside the sort of the larger trade deal piece and the negotiations ongoing there, whether we see a role for sort of cities in the UK and the US to sort of develop city links, and whether that's going to help, and whether that's something that, Conor, you mentioned your the Texas statistics earlier on, whether that's something we should be looking to. And Jake, from your perspective, is that something that's going to help on sort of the levelling up agenda, which I know is sort of very front and centre?
So shall I go first on that? Because I said a little bit about this earlier, but I mean, I do feel passionately that there is so much in a country of the scale of the United States. You can't do everything through Washington. And I was really struck when I went to Texas about the warmth of the reception I received, the ease of access to the political leaders within the state, because frankly, it was unusual for a UK government minister to be doing a single state visit in the United States. And the one thing I was really struck by when I got there was the Consul General in Houston had 3 people who were focused on developing the economic relationship from the UK side, and they were covering 5 states. That's criminal as far as I'm concerned for the UK to allow that total under-resource. And one of the things that I'd also been pushing very strongly when I was in government is that a free trade agreement in and of itself is a collection of pieces of paper. That's all it is. And unless companies on both sides step in and examine it and look at the opportunities that it creates and exploit them, you might as well not bother. And in the UK, I think the statistic was that it's less than 10% of UK companies export anything beyond the internal market of the United Kingdom. And of those 10%-ish that do, nearly 2/3 of them are passive exporters. In other words, they have a website, somebody happens upon that website from another country, places an order, they fulfill the order, they're therefore classified as an exporter. And one of the things that we inserted into the trade bill was to give HMRC in the UK the right to collect data when companies file their tax returns on whether a company is exporting or not, to allow the Department for International Trade and our trade support network to approach companies and saying, look, you know, you manufacture an interesting product, ceramics or whatever it may be, you know, have you thought about looking at the opportunities in X or Y country? And to try and aggressively ramp up an export promotion network, both inside the United Kingdom, but critically inside the target export nation. So I think there is a huge role for cities, city regions. Jake knows much more about this in the north than I do. What's left of the UK's manufacturing base is in the area that Jake speaks for and speaks for eloquently. And I think there's a huge amount we can do to connect cities and city regions with individual states in the United States and regions within other countries as well. And I think that the ease of political access will be so much more straightforward because it's not something that they tend to experience on a daily, monthly basis.
I mean, I agree with what Conor said. One of my best trips I did when I was in government was to British Steel over in the northeast, who are manufacturing the parts for Caterpillar to make tracked vehicles. The parts of the track that they make, they're made in the United Kingdom, exported to the United States. And what that taught me, actually, and many of our listeners and viewers will know this, is that people in business do not sit around waiting for people in government to tell them that they can get on and make good relations with businesses around the globe. They frankly have forgotten more about running their businesses internationally or nationally than many government ministers, probably any government minister will ever know. And that's why I pick up on, I think, the real opportunities for city regions like Greater Manchester, or really on a pan-North basis, to start to develop these relationships with states around the United States, which of course are fantastic building blocks for a future free trade federal agreement. But on an individual basis, businesses should be engaging with our embassies, with our consulate, and trying to build those relationships. And I might say, in a brief advert, that's one of the great things about being in the Squire Patton Boggs family, as we are a law, a UK law firm, but with a global footprint. And I think we do that a lot on behalf of our clients. I've seen it myself, sort of build those relationships across the globe, but particularly into the States. And I would encourage people to take advantage of that global network that Squires has.
Thank you. So just building on that, the point, and you've all shared some really sort of helpful thoughts, just thinking about our audience being sort of UK corporate and advisors, and probably having joined this session to get a view on, and what it means for them, what it means for their businesses, what they can be doing to be on the front foot. And we've heard some really useful thoughts. Perhaps we could perhaps come to each of you for sort of that one piece of advice that you would give to a UK corporate who's sort of sat and listened to these discussions, sort of whether it be to reassure or to inspire, or to give the sort of thoughts on next steps. So perhaps if we run through to everybody, John, thoughts on what you've heard and sort of advice for the UK corporates looking transatlantic.
Well, it's really boils down to two words: patience. Patience is a virtue, and but the second word is be hopeful. There's going to be an agreement at some point. The only question is when. We feel very strongly, I think, in the U.S. that we want to do everything we can to support our friends in the UK, and so there's going to be an agreement. The only question is when. Be optimistic and be patient.
Thank you. Joe, moving to you, your wise words of advice.
Yeah, sure. I think John's right. I do think that ultimately there will be an agreement at some point. But let's also look back to Brexit. It didn't happen overnight, and the agreement itself is not yet complete in terms of what will happen there. And so I think these agreements, these trade agreements, have always gone on for not weeks, not months, but years. And as far along as we believe we are, we're never as far along as we would hope. Therefore, so I do think patience. I think what the speaker is referencing to is that this new administration has to get up and running, and prioritizing in terms of the COVID response. They need to invest here in the States in infrastructure, get our own house in better shape and better order, our own economy. And then I do think we'll be looking outward. I've always said that trade is not just about the economics. It's never just about the economics. It's about our global positioning as well. And, whether, people would ask me why I supported the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, why did I support the South Korean Free Trade Agreement? And I always reference and said, if you want to be treated like South Korea or by Colombia, as we have with these agreements, act like them. Be allies of the United States, be steadfast, be true allies. A lot of people don't know that Colombia has been a steadfast ally of the United States going back to the Korean War, for instance. They're one of the only countries of the willing back during that time. And we look at South Korea, obviously, that same relationship. We're sending messages to those regions, those parts of the world. If you want a similar relationship, begin to act like them. And no country has had a closer relationship with the United States from its birth, whether it was a happy ending or beginning at that point is irrelevant. Throughout the centuries of our country's existence, Britain has been and the UK have been a true and trusted ally of the United States in the global world we live in. And that will be rewarded, I think, at some point, but not to diminish anything on any other side, even our special relationship, for instance, with the European Union writ large, or with the country of Ireland specifically here, that all that is taken into totality in terms of how we approach this. And I do think, as John said, I'd be hopeful that something positive will come out of this. And, this may very well outlive the Johnson administration. This may very well outlive the Biden administration, but ultimately something will take place in a positive way.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Joe. And just to supplement the question of your one piece of advice, perhaps for Conor and Jake, it's also, where should our audience, the UK corporates, where should they go to for support going forward as the discussions develop? So, Conor, perhaps.
So that was where I was going to go with the answer. I think by all means, I agree with both our colleagues stateside. Be patient, wait for the politicians to talk, wait for the trade experts to negotiate, but don't wait for an agreement to get stuck into the United States marketplace. It's an incredibly dynamic, vibrant, exciting land of opportunity. Margaret Thatcher always said she loved going to the United States because when she got off the plane, she could literally smell the freedom. And what I would say to British companies is get stuck in. We might get a free trade agreement that makes it even easier than it is now to do business between UK and United States, but it's already pretty straightforward. And I would say we have a network of specialist trade advisors located both in London and throughout the regions and nations of the United Kingdom. Access them, talk to them, say you're interested in exporting something or selling a service. We have a network, I believe not well resourced enough, but we have a network throughout the United States in various states of, again, people who can connect you to American companies, to trade associations, to chambers of commerce within the cities and within the states. And my advice would be get stuck in. And we've got, again, a whole network of trade advocates, people who the Department for International Trade have partnered with, have mentored, worked with to turn UK domestic supplying companies into UK exporting companies. And I would finally say, where do you go? Well, it's all available online. And if you need any particular help, I'm still totally plugged in to that entire network of DIT. I know many of them, the specialists, very well. My email address is in the public domain. If you need any additional help, ping me an email and I'd be delighted to support you.
Conor, if I could just add, Square Patent Boggs has nearly 20 offices around the United States. We cover the entire country in a way that not many law firms do. But I think, as you pointed out, we do a lot more than legal work. We're probably the world's preeminent public policy firm. And so Joe and myself and others not only work through Washington, but we work throughout all of our offices in the U.S. and around the world to connect people who need to be connected. It's something that we do. And so thanks. It's a good point that you brought up there.
So my key piece of advice is be impatient. I think you can wait decades for governments to find enough common ground to do a trade agreement. And of course, if we look at the most powerful boardrooms around the globe, whether it be Amazon or Microsoft or Jaguar or whoever it may be, they are populated and peopled by the impatient, the people who weren't prepared to wait around for someone else to do a better job because they knew that they could do it first. So don't wait for any government to tell you that you can grow your business. Get out there, as Conor said, use the network of both Squire Patent Boggs and the government. But 101, build those personal relationships, because countries do not really do business with each other. It is the businessmen and women of each country who trade with each other. Every single business, whether it's politics, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's services, is a relationship business. There is a world of new opportunities and new people waiting out there for you to meet and for you to take advantage of. And simply, if you If you sit around and wait for the government to give you permission to do it, either government to give you permission to do it, your competitors will have got there first, and many of the best opportunities will have disappeared.
If I could just make one other point that Jacob made earlier, I agree with him 100%. That I do think, though, that if the UK were able to have an agreement with the EU, which is obviously, I think, more important to the UK than the relationship with the US economically, that would certainly help in terms of getting a UK-US agreement done as well. But I agree with you in terms of what Conor had said as well about the states themselves. New York State Economic Development Corporation is a wholly almost separate issue from the state itself, where a lot of good can be done between the state of New York, for instance, and the UK. And I think, as John had mentioned as well, that I think Squire Patton Boggs is uniquely positioned because of our locations throughout the country, whether in Texas, in Florida, in New York, throughout the country, DC and beyond. And similarly, our presence in the UK and in the EU, I think, makes us uniquely fitted for helping our clients with that work.
Thank you all. Really interesting and some great tips there. So just conscious of our time, and remains to me just to say thank you very much to everybody who's listened in today. And in particular, thank you to our 4 panelists for your invaluable insights and overviews. And I know certainly for Joe and John, I think it's been an exhausting couple of days of commentary, and after obviously what was a sort of a very long week last week. So we appreciate the early start for us both. So we have had a few questions come into the Q&A box, which we haven't had a chance to get to. To the extent we haven't touched on those, obviously we will follow up. But thank you very much, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning, and look forward to speaking to everybody soon. Thank you.
Peace.